Okay, everybody, welcome back. I hope you had a nice quick break there. Um, Again, just a reminder about the code of conduct. It was on the screen as you were in the waiting room. And another reminder, please, about any questions to go in the Q&A box. So we've got with us now for this session, Frankie Cowper, who is Head of Education Programmes at Just Like Us, which is the LGBT plus young people's charity. Frankie started their career as a primary school teacher in London before leaving to undertake an MA with a dissertation focusing on primary school teacher experiences of LGBT plus inclusive education. Since 2021, she's worked at Just Like Us, supporting the programmes they run in schools across the UK, working to improve the lives of LGBT plus young people. So, Frankie, it's lovely to have you, and I'm going to pass straight over to you.
Brilliant, thank you. It's so nice to be here. So thank you for inviting me. As Claire said, please do pop any questions. I will leave time for questions at the end, but I'll also share my email address so you can always get in contact with me that way. Let's hope this works. There we go. Right, so Just Like Us, we're the LGBT plus young people's charity. Some of you may have heard us already, some of you may not. We exist because growing up LGBT plus is still a really tough thing to grow up being. Not in all circumstances, much easier than it once was in many respects, but still much harder than a lot of people think. We were founded 10 years ago next year, and we work with schools and young people across the UK to try and change this and make things better. So I will come back to this at the end. I'll leave this up and I'm not going to read this all to you. Don't worry, that would be a bit of a nightmare. But this is all the different free programs we have. Well, next week there is going to be an announcement, but I can tell you all now, as long as you don't go shouting it from the rooftops until next week, that now all our programs are free. So from the start of this year, most of our programs are free, and from this in coming the coming academic year, everything will be free. So we run various different things to support both primary and secondary schools, as well as our ambassador program for 18 to 25-year-olds. And we'll be talking a bit about each of these programs as we go through. I wanted to start this session by talking about the experiences of LGBT plus young people. I think this is a really important place to start because I think one of the things that I experience when I talk to people is obviously things have changed very rapidly in terms of LGBT plus inclusion, not particularly in schools only, but sort of countrywide, things have changed very rapidly. I finished secondary school in 2010, and only started in 2003. When I started secondary school, Section 28 was still in action, and schools weren't supposed to be talking about, well, they weren't supposed to be promoting. That meant that most of them in practice didn't talk about LGBT plus inclusion. That is quite a rapid change when you think about it. Gay marriage was only legalized in the UK in 2014, which is only 11 years ago. Again, something that I think seems quite normal to me because it's a lot of my adult life, but it's actually fairly recent. We have several different research reports, which some of these stats that I will share with you come from. And you can read them in full on our website. I would encourage you to have a look at them. They are thorough. So I wouldn't necessarily say you're going to want to read all of them, but they have kind of highlight pages which have key stats in. If you want any key stats, I can also send some over to you. I had loads more slides to include in this, but I decided there's only so many stats that we can take on a Tuesday morning. So I've included only a few, but there are a lot more too that are there and can be helpful for staff working in schools. So firstly, we're going to talk about the common challenges of LGBT plus young people and that they might face. It's really important to say not all LGBT plus young people will face all of these or any of these. Many young people have thriving, positive experiences. As an organisation, we try to talk about things in a positive way. But I do want to flag this because I think for those working with young people, it's important to be aware what young people might be facing. So there's sort of an obvious one to start with, but bullying related to their identity. We will talk about that in more detail in a little bit. Feeling different from other people, something I remember a lot because I didn't come out until I was in my 20s, but I did feel different a lot of my life. There can be all sorts of reasons that a young person would feel different. It might not be to do with being LGBT plus, but it can be a common experience. That can lead to isolation and loneliness. And then, of course, that can impact on mental health and well-being. anxiety around coming out, anxiety around telling people your identity. Some people have really positive experiences. I actually have really positive experiences coming out. So it's not to say that it's always going to be some big drama. For many young people, it's not. But there are many young people who face anxiety around it, even if actually it will be fine. I've got home life in there to cover kind of an array of different things. Um, Home life just means that for some young LGBT plus people, home life can be a fear or is in fact an issue. LGBT plus young people are much more likely to be homeless, for example. There is lots of reports and stats from AKT, which is specifically an LGBT plus young people's homelessness charity, around homelessness. And then LGBT plus young people are much more at risk of homelessness. But the other thing is, and I'm sure many people here are aware, that the LGBT plus topics in the news are becoming increasingly, what's the best way to put this? It's increasingly a hot topic that's debated. And if you are LGBT plus, to see your identity or identity similar to yours being debated can be incredibly invalidating and pretty scary. There is a lot, and there may be LGBT plus people in the room, I don't know. Obviously, I said I am. It can be really scary, and there has been an increase in homophobic and transphobic hate crime, for example, that can make existing as an LGBT plus person more scary. That's not just true for young people, but I want to put it in there. So here are a few kind of key statistics. The first two are from our Growing Up LGBT plus report, which was published in 2021 and looked at 11 to 18-year-olds. So the first one is that LGBT plus pupils were twice as likely to have depression, anxiety, and panic attacks. There are also many stats in there that I don't put in my slides just because I think they should come with a content warning around suicide and self-harm that I think are vital for schools to understand the increased risk to LGBT plus young people because of all these different nuances to an LGBT plus identity. Also, we found out that nearly half, 48%, had basically no positive messaging about being LGBT plus. We're going to talk a little bit about that today and what positive messaging can really look like. I think this is really important because it counteracts negative messaging, but also I think that many people, I think everyone is guilty of this to a certain extent because things have moved on a lot, assume that they're like, well, I'm an ally. I don't mind if someone's LGBT plus, that's enough. The truth is that in order to counteract the kind of negative narratives that might exist around LGBT plus identities in schools, we have to be positive. We have to be showing that it's a positive thing to be and that young people have positive role models and can look forward to positive life chances. Then our second report was called, oh my gosh, well, it slipped from my head, but it's about positive futures. It looked at 18 to 25-year-olds. And one of the things it looked at was whether their home and school background impacted their experiences. And what we found was that those from supportive families were twice as likely who did not come from, yes, were twice as likely to experience panic attacks. Sorry, everyone, I've got my words confused there. Twice as likely to experience depression. So this follows a young person, even if they escape a toxic home or school environment, it will have a long-term impact on them. We also have lots of stats around employment and things like that. I didn't include those, but if you want them, they're there. Then we did some research around parents, and we found that more than half of lesbian and gay parents had faced negative comments about their family. So that's for those working in primary schools. As you heard at the start, I'm from a primary school background. I taught a child with two dads, and he did experience quite a lot of homophobia directed at his dads that impacted him directly. And that's something we'll talk about in a little bit. So that's just a bit of a picture. I'm going to delve a little bit more into anti-LGBT plus bullying. This is something that Steve suggested might be helpful. We actually have a free e-learning module about tackling anti-LGBT plus bullying. We've got one for secondary and one for primary. So please do check those out. They take between half an hour and 45 minutes. They're totally free. As many people as your school can sign up for them as you want. And they delve into this a little bit deeper, basically. In terms of what it can look like, it could be making some comments about someone's identity. I think everyone would kind of guess that. But what I really want to emphasize is that it can be about someone's perceived identity. Anyone can experience anti-LGBT plus bullying, regardless of their identity. Something you get a lot that I've seen a lot in lower primary, or like mid, kind of lower key stage 2, I guess, is slurs, unfair comments, that kind of thing around children who are perceived as being, so for example, a boy who's more effeminate or a girl who's more, I don't know, more of a tomboy. I've even seen girls who cut their hair short being called a lesbian in a not positive way. That can also counts, right? Because it's also about an identity that is a protected characteristic. It might be derogatory language, physical abuse, sexualized comments can happen a fair bit. I have personally experienced that, and also excluding people. You know all this probably, but I wanted to emphasize for you that that this can happen to anyone, and that quite often this is based in stereotypes around different identities, around linking the way someone looks or behaves to a particular identity that is seen as a bad thing in some way. That happens a lot in schools, unfortunately. What I want to say though is that there's always a lot of focus on bullying, and that often it isn't bullying. It's about the casual stuff going on in school that is actually very harmful. For example, I was never bullied because of my identity, because as discussed, I was not out until I did left university. But what can happen is if a young person hears the word lesbian being used in a derogatory way, then it's indicating to them that that is a negative thing to be. It's not making sure that that's a safe space. I saw one of our ambassadors the other day delivered a talk, and she talked about how she had a group of friends at her school, and one of the sort of friends that she wasn't particularly friends with used a slur, and that made this ambassador, when she was sort of 15, did not feel safe in that friendship group anymore because everyone laughed. And she knew she was a lesbian, and not everyone in that group knew. And it wasn't directed at her, but it didn't feel like a safe space. So I'm kind of want to emphasize that it's not just about persistent bullying. It's about the kind of jibes. It's about stereotypes and sort of casual use of language. Very quickly, because I know we have some people here from primary schools, I wanted to talk about, I said a little bit about bullying around family members. It can often be casual use. The term "that's so gay" unfortunately really hasn't gone away. It was the problem when I was at primary school 30 years ago and continues to be a problem. Something I will say, and we are working on how to explore this more with primary school teachers, because it's quite a hard thing to kind of put into like words, is that the natural reaction, something I have done, by the way, is to say, no, don't say "that's so gay," right? And obviously, we don't want them to say it. However, what that teaches them is that gay is a bad word in general. And what we don't want to do is teach young people that gay is a bad word. We want to teach them that it's not good to use it as in a derogatory way. What can be really good is, and it's so helpful because younger children are kind of designed for this, is to redirect and say, when we use the word gay in this way, people who are gay can feel X way. We would encourage, like, it's a word that can mean a really positive thing for some people, but it's an identity that we kind of don't make fun of. It's really important to talk around that so that young people understand. And it can be gendered stereotyping, as I've discussed, that can kind of play a big role in primary school. Now we're going to go on for the next kind of section to think about how you can make your school environment more LGBT plus inclusive. What we think about when we think about this Just Like Us is we kind of split it into three key, I don't know, pillars, sections. The curriculum, safe spaces, and school policies. There are obviously other things, but we think that these kind of encapsulate the sort of the main things that we think are important. I would also say that a school context is obviously very important. Every school is different, every school community is different, and it is important to, when you're thinking about how you will talk about this in a school, manage those contexts effectively. I suspect we might get some questions around religious community members. We'll talk a bit more about that at the end, but that is often something which schools need to consider. Or if you're an SEND specialist school, for example, you will need to consider that. Doesn't mean this shouldn't be done, it just needs to be put in that context. We're going to talk a bit more about this in detail, but I wanted to show you this kind of visual which sort of breaks it down. The school context is in there. It's thinking about, and that will kind of be, we'll think about that in a bit more detail in a little bit. So when it comes to school policies, what I would say is that school policies don't mean anything unless they're actually acted upon. Everyone here will know that because you'll work in schools, and schools have differing approaches to this. Let's just put it that way. All of these things are good to have. And we often get asked, oh, do you have a sample policy? It's very hard to do that because there are so many different kinds of schools with different wording. We are working on something to support schools to do that. Can't promise you when it will be out, but it is something I'm working on. I would say that an anti-bullying policy, as we talked about, is really, really important. I had a question in a conference that I delivered a session in last week asking, should you have a specific anti-LGBT plus bullying policy? I think it's a great idea too, but only if that's the kind of practice of your school. What I would say is that what I think is important is that it is dealt with in the same way that discrimination related to other protected characteristics is dealt with. So if your school has a race-specific policy around discriminatory language, I think it's appropriate to have an anti-LGBT plus policy. If that's all dealt with in one policy, then it would be appropriate to have it in one policy. So I wouldn't say there's like a good way to do it, but it should be very explicit in there. And I think quite a few schools shy away from it, particularly in primary school, actually, because it's much harder to kind of quantify, basically. But it is important to emphasize these are protected characteristics. If they're the protected characteristics of a family, that is also true. And they should be dealt with in the same way and with the same seriousness as other discriminatory language. I do think that where possible, any kind of consequences in school should be educational first. That's a personal educational standpoint. But I think that particularly when it comes to discriminatory language based upon identity characteristics, we should enter them with, particularly with younger children, with the mindset that they can be educated and can understand why this is not appropriate. However, there should be appropriate escalation. What I do see most often in schools is that they have the policies, but they are not enacting these in a way that is, sorry, I've got ping on going on the background. They are not enacting these in a way that is in line with how they would deal with other discriminatory behaviours. And what I would say is that zero tolerance means literally nothing unless it's actually zero tolerance. All staff have to be on board with it. Something we can talk a bit about later if people have questions is staff who aren't on board with this. What I would say is that staff agree to a code of conduct when they join a school, and that includes conforming to things like the Equalities Act, there's like legal framework around anti-bullying. It is important to build this in there. But other things that you might look at are school uniform policies. Most schools have more inclusive uniform policies than they used to, I would say, but there is still some work to be done. Some schools will have a transitioning policy. A school I used to go to as a girls' school, which obviously, if you have trans pupils, it's hard for schools to know how to best support them. And they actually have a policy which does aim to do that. Not always appropriate. If it is in your setting, then do explore having that. And what I would say is just go on other schools' websites and see what they've done. I'm not going to say it's best practice, but you can get a feel for what they should look like. But also I would say, and we're going to now, that leads us into curriculum, having policies which look at how you address different identities and diversity across, and this is true for other diversity characteristics as well, in your curriculum and built into a curriculum review policy is really vital. So in terms of embedding LGBT plus inclusion, I like to think of the curriculum as slightly bigger than, I don't know, the medium term plan you've got or the whatever. I mean, that's obviously is the backbone of schools, but it is more than that. And I think everyone who goes into an educational setting knows that, whether or not we're allowed to do that or not. So do think about, when you're thinking about being inclusive, again, this is for any kind of intersectional identity a young person may have. Think about the schemes of works and units that you're doing, but also think about the way your content is being delivered, the specific content you are delivering. Think about what's happening outside of the classroom. Think about the form times, the pastoral times, read aloud, assemblies. All those things are a type of curricula. Think about those and how they can be more inclusive. One way to think about this is actualizing and usualizing. Usualize is a made-up word. It's made up by someone called Sue Sanders, who created LGBT History Month. But it's there because the idea is to not use the word normalize, because normalize can feel a bit, I don't know, it's quite a jarring word sometimes. It's like you're trying to be normal, like there is a norm. Is there really a norm? Whereas usual is about making something just part of the everyday, which I think feels a bit more natural to a lot of people who might see themselves sitting outside the norm. Actualizing is those explicit teaching bits that are around LGBT plus inclusion. So what this might look like is RSE or PSHE lessons specifically about LGBT plus people or families. Something we used to do when I used to teach year 2 was we would do a whole unit on different families, and we would do one lesson that was on LGBT plus families. We'd do another lesson on people who had single parents, people who lived with other family members, that kind of thing. That's actualizing. You're actually sitting down in a lesson saying, and we're doing an LGBT plus lesson now. This would also count if you are celebrating Pride Month, LGBT History Month, School Diversity Week, which we'll come on to in a minute, or doing any assemblies that are specifically about LGBT plus topics. Usualizing is the more everyday stuff. And I think that actualizing can seem easier to do in some ways, but actually usualizing is probably easier once you get into the swing of it. So this is including it in the everyday. So what this could look like is making sure that some of the books you've got in your classroom, if you've got a classroom library, have LGBT plus characters of families. It could be including so having writing units, they're usually in primary schools and secondary schools, really, they're based around a text or kind of piece of media, making some of them LGBT plus inclusive. Doesn't have to all be about that, but they're LGBT plus people or characters are just there. It could be changing your examples. We've got a lesson which is around mixed maths problems. And one of the things it does is it's based around a wedding where it's the characters, 2 mums are getting married, and it's cake, that sort of stuff that they're doing problems around. That can be really powerful. It doesn't have to be a lesson about it, but you're just dropping it in there. It can be lessons around celebrations where you talk about birthdays and the character is LGBT plus, or weddings or pride events. It can be talking about LGBT plus figures. I studied World War I poetry at school, and I was never told that any of these men were gay. I should have guessed because it was quite obvious probably, but at the time we weren't told. It doesn't have to be a whole song and dance about it, but it is actually quite relevant to the poetry. Now, I hope that would have changed, but I don't know that it has in schools. So this is the kind of everyday stuff. What I would say is that actualizing is easier because it's there and it's sort of obvious. Schools tend to sort of pigeonhole it. However, it actually requires more of a whole school approach. Usualizing doesn't require so much of a whole school approach, which is actually really useful for schools. You can do this in your own classroom and in your own practice much more easily and subtly over time. I do still believe, though, that usualizing, if the whole school does it, that's when it will really be utilized. If only one staff member does it, it's not quite having the same impact. But what I would say with all these things is start small. In the school I worked in, the only thing that was really possible at the time I was working in that school was to do that lesson on LGBT plus families. And they did a lesson kind of in upper key stage 2 about healthy relationships where they talked about LGBT plus people as well. That was really the only way to do that in that school because of the context. It was better to do that than not do it at all. I was then able and encouraged others to have some LGBT plus books in their classroom that kids could just pick up and read. It was something that kind of did in our school. You'd have your classroom library. You can do that too. It can be very small. A small change is still a change. So I'd really encourage you to think about that. We do have checklists that people could use. I haven't included it in here today because I'm kind of trying to cover a lot of different things, but can share that with people if they would like to. This is just a bit of space to sit and think. I'm not going to ask people to share anything, obviously, because of the format we're in, but I want you to just have a think based on what we are about to speak about. In fact, this isn't Spaces Around the School. I've got the wrong title on here. What we've just talked about. What does your school do already in regards to curriculum? What could it do better? Just have a little bit of a think. I will pause for 30 seconds to drink my water, and then we will move on. Okay. We are now going on to talk about spaces around the school. But first, I just wanted to very quickly mention School Diversity Week in this point and our resource library, because we're talking about curriculum. School Diversity Week is, just like us, is annual celebration of LGBT plus inclusion. It's primary and secondary schools. It's actually happening next week. There is still time to get involved. You can sign up totally for free on our website. There is a folder marked School Diversity Week. We've got guide for primary, a guide for secondary, and posters, assemblies, already made for you. I would really encourage you to do it, however big or small. Things you could do are creating themed displays, running some of our assemblies. We've got discussion cards there. We've got activity booklets for both primary and secondary. We could have themed events. We've got lots of details in our guide about what kinds of events you could do. And then we also have, leading me on to my next slide, lots of LGBT plus inclusive lessons. So what we have is our resource library. In that we have lessons and lesson plans for across the curriculum, right from EYFS up to Key Stage 5. We are building on that year on year. And that includes lots of things. One thing it includes is lots of lesson plans. So I've mentioned a few of them here. We also have a comprehensive reading list, which goes right from board books up to, I don't know, Virginia Woolf. So really covering the span. That is updated each year for staff to use, and you can access the previous ones as well. This is to encourage people to have a diverse book collection. There are so many LGBT plus inclusive books covering so many different themes, topics, identities. It's really exciting because that didn't used to be the case. We've also got lots of assemblies and form times, circle time discussion cards if you're in primary, PSHE lessons. We've got a series of story time video recordings for primary schools. And we've also got resources for other awareness days and weeks. We've got some stuff for LGBT History Month. We've got some stuff for anti-bullying week that you can kind of delve into. So we're now going to talk about creating safe spaces. What a safe space is I suppose, rather subjective. But what we say is that there's a few key things. I like to talk about visual markers because my old CEO used to say, oh, that's just tokenistic. I don't like it when schools do that. I actually disagree vehemently. I feel so much safer if I go into a space that has pride flags up. I will patronize shops that have it or pubs that have it. So why wouldn't it be the same for schools? If schools have active signs, it doesn't mean that they have to do the other stuff as well. So if you do it on its own, not as impressive. But if staff are wearing rainbow badges or lanyards that have pride flags on, I go into school and I instantly know I feel safer as an adult going to the school. I can guarantee young people in the school feel safer and that families feel safer if they're LGBT plus. It's something I would be looking for when I have children, is a school that has that sort of stuff and that I can see actively celebrates LGBT plus people and experiences. Of course, that has to go alongside all the other stuff. So the zero tolerance policies, really clear policies, is something else I would be looking for in schools, and clear understanding from staff about how they implement education for those who are first-time offenders, as it were, and how they go about dealing with repeated incidences of discriminatory language. What I would then say is that for secondary schools more specifically, having an LGBT plus and allies group is vital. This is a really, really important way to make sure that there is a safe space in a school. Obviously, the ideal is the whole school is a safe space. But even if it is, having a space where there can be community is really important. We have our pride groups. I'm going to skip on because of time. We have I'm actually going to skip forward to here and then we'll go back. We have a pride groups program at Just Like Us where we support the running of LGBT plus and allied groups in schools. We support ones that are already in existence. We support people to set them up. They are such an important space for community, which I think is really important. And unless you have that experience, can't necessarily understand how important finding that community can be. Young people can provide peer support where appropriate. I always say to the young people who kind of are in these groups, adults usually need to jump in, but they might be able to support one another. They can at least provide each other with positive kind of words and support. But they also can really support the school. One of the things that we've really, really loved seeing is groups where they have made positive change in their school based upon the discussions that are had in these groups. There are some incredible examples of hard work of staff and students. There are some schools where the students in the group have shared their experiences to staff as basically staff training. They have led on student voice. They've shown why this work needs to be done. And that's really, really important in a school. Some schools will have a diversity group or something like that. I would say that there is a difference for an LGBT plus and allied group because although we say and allies, because many students may want to come if they are allies and also may not know their identity, it's important that LGBT plus young people have a space where they could be out and if they wanted to be, and groups that are kind of cross diverse in terms of their mission can kind of prevent that, can create it can create issues in the school. However, LGBT plus and ally groups should endeavour to be as intersectional as possible to show that LGBT plus people can be all sorts of other identities. You can be disabled, you can be black, you can be brown, and LGBT plus. That's an important thing that the groups should do. So that's what I would really say, and I think that's we support only secondary schools. Can be done in primary schools, but we don't support schools to do that at the moment. And I think it's just a really, really important and vital space. We have fortnightly new activities for groups. We have book and media recommendations. We run termly student leader training online to support developing skills for the young people involved in running the groups. We have a WhatsApp community for staff to provide support for one another and share challenges and nice things, we hope. You can book phone calls with us and you can access lots of different documents, posters, that kind of thing. Apologies for doing this out of order, but I kind of got away with myself and thought, well, I've got a slide for this. So I'll go back now and say that when you're thinking about the kind of safe space stuff, what I would say is that trying to make it based on positive messaging and making it active is vital. The positive messaging bit is quite a tricky one because you don't want to deny that there can be challenging experiences. There are ways to talk about that in a way that show young people that they can have positive experiences. But the active thing is what I really wanted to emphasize to you here. Many adults that I speak to who work in schools are like, well, I'm an ally. I don't mind if a young person is LGBT plus or a colleague. I'm like, yeah, okay, that's fantastic. But what have you done to show people? We have some amazing staff working with us who are allies who showcase their allyship in lots of active ways. It's really important to do that. As I've said, visual markers. Think about, we in primary school, one thing you sometimes have is like our family is board in early years. If you have that, do you have LGBT plus families? If you have them, I heard of one school, this is quite upsetting really, but that had a family that had gay parents and they weren't allowed to put that on the board because it might cause too much controversy. Obviously that's don't need to tell anyone here that is not the correct way for the school to have approached that. So if that's the case in your school, please do try and address that. Books, if you've got a school library, if you've got books in your school, they should represent everyone in your school. That's true across many different identities, and there is a lot of work going into schools to make sure that books are representative of the communities they are in, but they should also represent the community that your students will go out into, and that includes LGBT plus people. And just face gender stereotypes. I still hear so many schools saying like line up girls and boys and girls versus boys. And not only is that, to be quite honest, quite old fashioned and kind of embeds in children the idea that girls have to be one way and boys have to be the other way. It's not really specifically about being LGBT plus, but it is that huge binary that is very rigid that then makes LGBT plus people who might sit outside of that be more, it kind of encourages that attitude. So I'd really encourage people to tackle those as well. Right. I wanted to leave enough time for questions. I'm actually going to put this up in so that you can all have a quick think, because again, I want everyone to have a bit of thinking time. I do have some bits to round up, but I want you to maybe have a think now about everything you've heard, and I'll give you kind of 2 minutes to think about where are you at now? What is one takeaway from this session? There might be loads of different things buzzing around your head, but what's one thing that you want to take away, either to do immediately or to put in action for next year? It doesn't just have to be visual markers. I wish I'd put in another air bubble here for thinking, but imagine it says what I just said, because then I will go into explaining a bit about wrapping up. Give you a couple of minutes. Right. I hope everyone has a key takeaway that they're going to kind of bring onwards. I said I'd talk a bit about this, and this may be where people's questions come. I don't know. It depends on who's here. But one thing that I often get asked is, okay, this is all very nice, but my school won't do it. Firstly, I would encourage you to try and think more positively. It's not always that easy. I'm not going to pretend it's that easy. That schools actually do sometimes want to do this work, and often what will often happen is the loud voices of a few people who are very anti this work will outweigh the voices of actually the majority of people who either actively think it's a good thing or don't actually care. The majority of people are kind of neutral. And the thing that it's our job to do is to make sure that those voices don't get overpowered by a few voices who don't want schools doing this work. If you are coming across any backlash or any kind of issues, I would say a few things. The first thing, and this is probably the most important thing, is that LGBT plus people exist. LGBT plus students exist, LGBT plus families exist, LGBT plus staff exist. And if people won't believe any of that, LGBT plus people exist in Tesco, in the workplace, on the train, on the bus. LGBT plus people are out there, and in the UK will be in most places visible. There will be something. Young people deserve to be prepared for the world they're going out into. I hate to talk about career readiness because I think schools shouldn't just be factories for making children into little worker bees. However, if they go into the workplace at some point in their lives, they are likely to be going into a workplace that has rules, codes of conduct, that kind of thing. I hate the word tolerance because I want to be more than tolerated. But if tolerance is what we get, you will have to tolerate your colleagues who are LGBT plus. You will, in most good workplaces, not be allowed to discriminate against them. There are legal protections in place. It is important that we prepare young people for that. But it's also, and most importantly, important that young people who are LGBT plus might be in the future, might have LGBT plus family members, or might not know who they are, like little old me. It's important that they know that being LGBT plus is something that can be joyful. I think that the focus is often on existence. It's a good place to start. I'm not going to, I've put it in the slides because I believe it to be true. However, I love being a lesbian. I am extremely happy and I feel very lucky for this to be part of my identity. That is not shared by everyone. And I very much understand I'm very privileged in a lot of ways. But I like young people to see that I'm happy and healthy and thriving in who I am. That's important. And schools can play a really, really significant role in this because they introduce young people to a wider world than their family unit. Some family units will already be teaching their young people this, fantastic, but we know that that's not going to be a uniform experience, and schools have a chance to make that a more uniform experience, at least at school. So young people deserve to know that it's not something to be hidden, and that's why the active positive messaging comes in. It's really, really important. I've put in there, and I hate putting this in there, and I'm sure you'll agree, Ofsted and ISI and Eston, if you're in Wales, they actually talk about this stuff. I have had schools say to me, the school has come up with a problem of homophobic language. I'm the person running our pride group. I'm the one who's trying to solve this. I'm doing student voice. Yes, there are many things in the news and things, but schools want to see that all students are being supported, and particularly any discriminatory language is being kind of dealt with seriously. It is important that you do this work, and many reports will look at it. I know no one here probably wants to do anything just because of Ofsted. It's not why anyone goes into the education space, but it is something to consider and can work well with SLT. So I'm putting it in there for them, really. But most importantly, and I'm sure everyone who's attending a day like this agrees with this, schools are designed to be safe spaces. We want young people to thrive. We want young people to celebrate who they are, to hopefully go out and build a world that is less hate-fueled than it is currently. We play a role in this, and inclusion of all sorts, as you talk about today, is vital for that, and LGBT plus inclusion is part of that. So that's what I would say. I know it's not as simple as all of this, and I can say all these things, and the day-to-day in schools isn't necessarily like this, but I wanted to include that. back to here, because I just wanted to talk about, I wouldn't be doing my job properly if I didn't talk about our programs. So we have our resource library, which has all our curriculum, subjects, assemblies, reading lists. And also when you're part of that, you can access our e-learning training. We are developing some more over the summer. We have our Pride Groups program that you can join to get support activities, be part of a network and community. We have our school talks. So these are done by our trained ambassadors who are 18 to 25-year-old volunteers. You can see our ambassador program at the bottom. And they share their personal experiences in secondary schools. They are relatable because they're 18 to 25. Many of them have only recently left school themselves, or many at university or in sort of internships and apprenticeships and things like that. They talk about their experience, so it's relatable and it's kind of no one can deny it's their experience, but they will then talk about how to be an ally, what you could do to support your friends, and the importance of being an ally. They always move me to tears, the stories, and they are really lovely. And as I said, this program will be becoming free from next year. We have School Diversity Week. Please join in. It will make me very happy because this is my baby. But there is still time. It's essentially a Pride Week. We call it a different name so that schools can do something if they're feeling a bit scared of the word pride. And then we have our ambassador program. That's for 18 to 25-year-olds. If you know of any LGBT plus young people who want to meet a really cool bunch of nerdy other LGBT plus young people and learn loads of cool things, I wish I were 18 to 25 for many reasons, and this is one of them. There's also a mentorship program. It's really cool. So this is what we do. We've got a few minutes left for questions. I don't know if any have come in, Claire. Please do ask away.
Yeah, we've got a couple. 3 actually on there at the moment. Can the safe space, you were talking about your safe spaces before, Sally's asking, can the safe space be for all groups who feel they need it, or should schools need to look at specific LGBT plus safe spaces?
I think that and this is a personal opinion, I think it's really important to have LGBT plus safe spaces. I think it's important that they're for allies too, as I would have attended as an ally when I was at school because I didn't know my identity. So it's important for that reason, but also it's important that allies get involved as well. Young people can bring their friends. But as I said, I think one of the big things is that when schools have a kind of equalities group or a diversity group, I think that's really important too. What I would suggest is you need both, because I think it's important to look at it holistically. I think it's important that people from different identities get together and share their experiences, and it's a kind of a holistic approach to supporting all students in the school. I think if you've got kind of ambassadors or council members or whatever you call it in your school, that's a really helpful thing. However, I feel that being LGBT plus comes with different, not necessarily better or worse, but challenges and opportunities that people who are say it's to do with your race or ethnicity. It's a very obvious thing people will see when they see you. Obviously, that comes with it, as I'm sure everyone here would agree, many challenges. Being LGBT plus doesn't necessarily. However, most young people are not going to not at risk with their families because of their ethnic or racial identity, because probably it's shared by people in their family space. Obviously, there's many nuances to this. LGBT plus young people are much more likely to experience mental ill health and other challenges, are more likely to experience youth homelessness because of their identity as an LGBT plus young people. We do have statistics in our reports about the intersection of several identities. So Black lesbians are much more likely to experience certain things, young people from a faith background. So there's much nuance within this. But I feel that it's really important because if a young person is dealing with these issues and they come to a general diversity group, they might be able to share it, but there is quite a strong chance that they might not feel able to talk about those things in that space, and actually things can be slipping through the cracks that a school would be the only safe space for them to talk about these issues. There can be issues that can be picked up much quicker if this space exists. Young people love them. We're doing a research project at the moment, which will be available not until next year, but there'll be so much good stuff, stats and stuff like that around why this is so important. But yeah, I feel like it's vital, but not all schools are going to do it that way. That's also fine. But I think it's good. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that's great. Karen's asking, where could we get examples of how to show active messaging and allyship, etc.?
So there's lots of, I would say lots of our resources for young people can be very helpful for adults too. Sometimes staff come to me and say, I've been asked to do like a CPD thing. What should I do? And I'm like, well, do you know what I would do? I'd take one of the assemblies. You can change it around, but you can make it slightly less colourful so it seems less like it's designed for 15-year-olds. But actually, the messages are usually the same. Um, if you're a part of our Pride Groups program, we have something called Allies Week. We have this acronym that we now use across our programs, which is LEAD, and that stands for Listen, Educate, Advocate, Do. So, it's showing how you can be an active ally. So, listening to LGBT plus people when they tell their experiences to you, trying to understand a range of different identities and experiences. Educate is about educating yourself, reading up on things, but also helping other people be educated about the LGBT plus community. Advocate is about speaking up for other people, letting people's voices shine through, and then do is the kind of actions things. I would say in a school, a really easy thing you can do is wearing like a lanyard or a pin or something rainbowy that shows that. That's a really good thing. Having a poster up in your classroom. We've got some that are like, this classroom isn't, can't remember what it says. There's some posters that kind of have that kind of messaging that you can print off and have in your classroom. Those are really easy wins, to be honest, and that's probably the best way. But I think that it's about and also not shying away from the hard conversations. I see a lot of stuff in Pride Month on my For You page and stuff that's very love is love focused, and it's not untrue. However, there is a lot of discrimination going on, and things are getting worse for some people. It's important that you speak up for people if you have a voice and are safe to do so. In a school context, protect yourself. You're a professional, and we know it's a tricky environment. I'm not going to encourage anyone to do anything that's going to put themselves at any risk. But don't leave it all to your LGBT plus colleagues. Too often, the only staff that engage with us are LGBT plus themselves. It's a huge mental load, and it can be more risky for them. Particularly in tricky environments. So if you do have LGBT plus colleagues, offer to help run the group, offer to help run an event, suggest running a Pride event, suggest taking part in School Diversity Week. Those are bigger things and maybe easier if you're more senior. You know, if you're an ECT, it's probably not so easy, but some ECTs are very brave. Go ahead and do it if you are. Yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, it did indeed. And the last question we've got, a couple of minutes left. Are there resources from Sharon? Are there resources available for SEND students?
Yeah, so we have a few resources that are specifically designed for SEND students. We have a few assemblies, we have a few others. We've actually got some that are going to be uploaded in the next few weeks. I need to remember to do that. The other thing I would say is that I basically run that part of things. If there's stuff that you think you need, I can't promise you we will do it. We're quite a small team, but we will try. We are trying to design things that work for staff. At the moment, I'm doing phone calls with teachers to kind of basically get them to tell me what they would like us to do, because everyone wants different things. But if we can get some general kind of help, then that's useful. The other thing I would say is that all of our resources are designed to be taken and differentiated, changed for your environment. We're not precious about that. They're supposed to be examples. I know I worked in a school where I wasn't allowed to have any other branding. It all had to be in our exact font and all that kind of stuff. I know lots of schools are like that. So and the same is true. I think for if you have pupils with specific needs, we've shown an example, but we can't do it for every need. And it would be wrong of us to try and do it anyway, because every student is different. We do have some, yes. And it is really, I would just, as a last thing, say, it's really important that this is covered with SEND students and in SEND specific schools. Too often, people are too scared to do it. And those students deserve to learn about this as much as any other student. And it is possible to do. There are lots of schools doing this in a really, really good way that supports students. That's helpful.
Brilliant. No, that's great, Frankie. Thank you very much. Steve has also put the link in chat to the resources as well.
Oh, thank you so much, Steve.
That's great. He's good.
What a superstar. I think I've got this is my email address. And then the info@ one you can also email. And if you just put, like, usually if it's about stuff like that, it will get sent to me anyway, or to one of my colleagues who'll pass it on. But do feel free to email me if you've got any questions. You can sign up on our website. It takes like 30 seconds. And then our website, as a disclaimer, We are trying to change the website. That's quite a lengthy process. The website is my personal nemesis. So if you've got questions about it, please do ask me. I'll take screenshots for you. Once you get it, it's intuitive, but until then, it's sadly not. So yeah, that's not unfortunately, I'm not techie enough to do much about that myself. But yeah, fab.
I'm sure
Thank
you
you
can
so
find
much.
someone who is. No, thank you very much, Frankie. That was really interesting, and very useful as well. I'm quite sure a lot of people are going to go back into it with lots of ideas about how they can support you, but obviously support
Yeah,
our
support your
LGBT
students,
plus
the most
pupils
important
as
thing.
well. Yeah.
Fab. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care,
Right,
everybody.
everybody, we're back at 11 o'clock, at 12 o'clock for the Equalities case law update. So just a quick 10-minute break and we'll see you back.